So everyone, our slide deck today is at heartmind.us. I am so glad you're here. Good morning.
Good morning, Delane. I'm thrilled to co-present with you and as always, on this important topic. And really excited that we're going to add a third co-presenter to
A third
our.
wheel, you might say.
I wasn't going to say that. In
It's
any
time
case,
for a tricycle. I mean, honestly, we need as much safety as possible.
he hardly requires an introduction, but Glenn Warren, who's the Director of Libraries, Outreach, and Literacy from Encinitas Union School District, is our co-presenter for today's presentation on connecting student hearts and minds. And thank you, Susan, for being our amazing moderator and facilitator and smashing that admit button as every time all these new folks come in. So it's a great group we've got already, and I'm thrilled to see it. This is a special presentation. We wanted to take something that Delane and I have been leading on around social emotional learning for the last year and a half, and really look at it from an administrator's perspective. And that's part of the reasons why we brought Glenn in. He's not only a district administrator at Encinitas Union, but he's also been recently tapped to lead the effort for what they call Cloud Campus. And I'm sure Glenn will speak more to that as we get through the presentation. But I wanted to start with just a couple of perspectives that we've seen out on the internet, and we thought were worth hearing. And we thought that they fit into the topic that we're talking about right now. This is Wade Buckman, a teacher, and I saw this tweet and it broke my heart. It was just recently, as you can see, November 16th. As we were preparing for this presentation, I found notes posted out there, cries for help, support, recommendations, and grabbed them and sent them to Delane and Glenn as we were thinking about this presentation. So this was one of them. Some of them are downers, but some of them are sort of positive in nature. And so here's another one that's a tough one, but I think it's important to demonstrate honesty. This one's anonymous. I want to keep it anonymous because I don't want to reveal violate the privacy of the person that was sharing this with me. But I think it's an important statement. This comes from an administrator's perspective. And so I think it's even more important that we have these kinds of conversations and be open about them. And then on the more positive side, this was fabulous. This was a great example. I have a link to this in the notes on the slides if you want to go and see who posted this, which is fabulous that their administrator took the time to check in on this teacher, and it met everything. And then another sort of broader perspective in the world of leadership that I think fits in with our topic today. If you're familiar with the Prime Minister of New Zealand, she's earned a lot of respect, and she has mine. And she talks here about empathy in a positive light, which I think is hugely important. So with that setting the stage, these sort of examples, I wanted to hand it back to Delane and Glenn to kick us off for this presentation. By the way, the presentation is meant to be interactive. We're going to invite you to participate. We've got a couple of tools that will help us do that. I'm going to largely drive and try to make sure that the conversation is moving along, and I'll be a bit of a timekeeper along with Susan, I'm sure, to make sure that we don't go over, because we've got 2 sessions back to back today. So with that, Delane or Glenn, do you want to talk about the 3 things that we believe as a presentation team?
Sure.
Oh, I accidentally clicked on the link.
So we believe that everyone here loves their students. And so this will be a space for us to talk about leadership, issues that you might be encountering, but our focus is definitely on students. As I previously mentioned, that it's okay to be vulnerable. I know it's very hard to open up. And so if you are not okay, then this is the place to be not okay.
Well, that means I'll fit in.
And Glenn, I think you should talk about this point.
Yeah, it's funny. I hear so much stuff about, when it comes to the topic that we're on, which I'm glad more folks care about. I hear about the idea of getting it right. I'm not sure we ever hit there. This is not something that we check the box and we're done with. So this is a journey, and like love itself, can any of you, can any of us say we've arrived at loving perfectly? I think the answer would be no, unless the rubric is really low. So this is one of those situations where we're just not done, and uh, we're going to have to continue with this journey. So um, our hope is that we'll inspire you along the way. Just to be clear, we have no intention of convincing anybody about anything. We just want to do a lot of confirming of what's already in your heart and souls anyway. So hopefully you'll get a lot of encouragement and confirmation that you're on the right track.
And of course, we're glad you're here today, just like Bob Ross. So we wanted to talk a little bit about why the three of us, why are we here? We wanted to start with why, and I'm happy to kick it off. As many of you know, I started my educational career being the techie teacher on campus. I shifted into professional development, and I shifted into nonprofit, and did work at the amazing organization Q for 13 years. I continue to work in ed tech. And so why social emotional learning? And the reason why, very short answer, is I wanted to connect with students' emotions. I wanted to connect with the whole child. I think technology often leaves that out, but it doesn't have to. So for me, this is a mandate. This is an essential shift in the way that I'm thinking about the use of technology, and making sure that we're always considering the whole child.
Thank you, Mike. My why, I want to give a quick shout out to Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. I had the privilege of being able to visit many, many school sites, many different styles of learning. And when I was invited to be a tech coach for our incarcerated youth and students in our court and community schools, I realized the importance fundamentally of connecting with students. And so being able to learn more about students, to make that connection, and to focus on the why became my why.
My why is similar to Mike's and Delaine's. My why is summed up pretty quickly, and that is love. I know that sounds a bit schmaltzy for some of you, but I make no apologies for that word whatsoever, because having three special needs children who've gone through the public school um, process, the deciding factor between where my children thrived and where they did not was not how incredibly competent the teacher was or how many standards they got accomplished or even what the test scores were. Is it that they gave a crap about my child? And I got to tell you, the whole idea of love and education, uh, you can tell the difference when somebody actually cares about the student more than they do about the standards. And I think the social emotional learning conversation is important and has risen uh, justifiably, absolutely. But I do think the fact that it had to arise it arose because we were setting conditions that made it a deficit. So I do think the SEL is the whole movement is a bit of a spotlight on the normal education that we were providing where it was absent, which makes us to probably have to take a hard look at what we were valuing more than other things. And obviously, students should have always been at the center of all learning. And so that my why is I want to advance some love in the room, man. That's why I'm here.
It is all about love.
That's what I think.
And we'd love to ask you all as well about your why you've come to this session, why you've chosen. And we've set up a Slido. If you haven't used it, Delane, do you want to talk us through how this works while I pull it up?
Oh, absolutely. So this is another tech tool for your tool belt that allows you to use polls and Q&A and ideas. So you'll get an opportunity. If you follow this link, you can join us at bit.ly/heartmindqa, or you can go straight to Slido and type in HeartMind as the code. But we're hoping that you will join us in responding to one of these three categories. So as we move into this discussion, we'd love to see your feedback to connect with us, as well as to connect with other participants. So it should be, there's no account needed for you to be able to use this. You can go straight into Slido and start making those connections. So
And
where
which,
would we like everyone to start?
I was thinking under ideas. Is this where we were thinking of collecting these?
I think polls. We
Polls.
wanted,
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I think polls too. I mean, actually, obviously, I know we have an aversion towards polls, especially what we've been through recently, but I do think polls is where we should start, and it gives people an opportunity to put in their something that matters to them. You know, we just got a chance to the three of us to say what matters to us. One of the things that we believe that unless we're asking our staff and our students what matters to them and sincerely listening, how in the world can we advance social emotional learning? So if you'd be so kind, if you could put in the polls area something that matters to you, what matters, what's your why? What you can use a singular word or phrase, whatever you think. I think there's some examples coming up right there. Look at that. Perfect. Yeah.
so there is a 25 character limit. So you might need to
Oh, so
summarize.
supercalifragilisticexpialidocious is not something we can use, I'm assuming.
Right.
Oh,
A pretty big abbreviation there.
okay. Super. Oh, look at that. Oh, that's wonderful.
I put the link in chat. It took me 3 attempts, but the third one is a direct click. If you just click on that, it'll take you straight there.
Empowerment, connecting.
Empathy. I like that.
Yeah. Test. I'm assuming somebody just wrote the word test. I'm assuming, but I don't know. Maybe
That's why they're here.
that's why they're here. Maybe we're being tested. Maybe that's it.
Well, the test worked.
It-
There you go. Voice. That's important.
Voice.
I love
That's
that.
what we're trying to do right now.
Maslow before standards. Yeah, you got to have the foundation there.
And as always, I am more than happy to steal your ideas and employ them in my class. So I would love to hear anything that you would love to share. You can either do that here in the chat so we can all enjoy that, or a little bit later under ideas.
Okay, so now support and voice are bolder and larger because they've gotten multiple responses. Look at that.
I like that. That's good.
Empowerment.
Look at that. Boy, you know what? We made some really good assumptions about the room.
I think they do. I think they do care.
Yeah, I think so. I think
Okay.
the world's a better place right there.
We can revisit that during the presentation, and we have as
Can we, I know I want to spend a time just watching that.
I know it's a great thing to watch, but I also want to make sure we honor
Oh, the president. Okay. All right.
there is that. So, Glenn, you kind of do this already in Encinitas. Do you want to talk us through how you use this sort of a point collection?
Oh yeah. If you're gonna have to probably shut me up at some point, but yeah, I'd be glad to
Many
share
times.
about this. Yeah, just please jump in. But one of the things we talked about, this whole idea of love, there seems to be this collision between social emotional learning and academics. And I think in some ways the dirty little secret, which everybody knows is not a secret at all, is that in school, academic seems to be what the primary focus is, because there's tests, those tests that have to, I guess they came up in the polls. And so what ends up happening is that unless we bring love and bring social emotional value into the academic realm, it's always going to be, would you like fries with that for SEL? It's always going to be on the side. And so this was an attempt that over the years for me, that it basically came down to just three things: that I wanted all of our teachers in our district to empower students with make sure these three chords are there. In other words, this is pretty bare bones, but I heard that most hit songs are made up of 3 or 4 chords anyway. So it's amazing how you can get a lot of hit songs with just 3 or 4 chords. It's amazing how much empowered learning you could get with just these 3 chords. And I'll explain what they are. First is the exclamation point, which stands for find out what matters to you. Find out what matters to the student. I mean, not what is the standard. Put that on the side. In fact, would you like fries with that, frankly? But the point is that unless we're asking explicitly and often what matters to you, to the teachers, to the student, especially to the student, and you're not collecting that data, it's like, well, hey, do you find out what matters to your students? Oh yeah. What is it? I don't know. Well, then you didn't do it. So you got to find out, what matters to them, and that could be in any given lesson. It could be in anything. Just what got your attention? What fascinated you? What upset you? That is the explanation mark. The second thing is another thing that documentedly, research based, is true, that our students come to us with an amazing set of questions. I don't know if you've ever met a kindergartner before. They're amazing. You really should find one and talk to them. They're amazing. But kindergartners come into K-12 education with a pedal to the metal desire to ask questions. And they typically exhaust adults with the questions that they have. So they come with all these questions. And by the time they graduate, we've completely shut that down. And so what a part of student empowerment is not, students are used to having to be, in essence, question factories, answer sweatshops, in the classroom. And what we're trying to do is say, hey, wait a minute. We want them to be, you can't say you're empowering students and not let them ask the questions. In fact, I had somebody say to me, well, Glenn, what's the essential, I have to ask the essential question. I'm the teacher. I go, who died and left you, boss, of the essential question? Let the students ask the questions. You might be surprised by what they come up with. And another thing about that is think about the equity of questions. When you ask who knows something, you instantly have highs and lows and middles. But when you ask the students, tell me what you don't know, what you want to learn, then everybody's on the same page because everybody wants to learn something. And by the way, if students aren't formulating questions, the hunger for learning is absent. So you can judge if there's any hunger for learning in your class or with your students if they've been given the keys to the questions. And then finally, this idea of connections. This is the thing that's the most exciting, frankly. This thing, oh my gosh. What's so exciting about this last piece is this idea of connecting desired learning with required learning, or the other way around. So for example, let's say you had a strange student who was preoccupied with, say, pepperoni. Like all they care about is pepperoni. I would admit that's weird. But let's say all they care about is pepperoni. I don't know why, but that's their thing. And you're studying, I don't know, ancient civilizations. To ask that student to make the connection between pepperoni and ancient civilizations, the amount of creativity that is involved there is breathtaking. So when we ask students to start making these connections between the things that they have to learn and the things they want to learn, I got to tell you, and it's not necessarily just in this order, it can be given at any time, but I got to tell you, this has been an amazing piece of empowerment. And I will submit to you that if these 3 very basic things aren't happening in the classroom, you can kiss goodbye student voice and empowerment. It's not there. So again, 1, are we finding out what matters to our students? 2, are they the ones asking the questions? And 3, are they the ones making the connections between the required and desired learning? And if that's happening, you got some empowerment happening.
And Glenn, I've put up a photo here of one of the rooms where this is actually happening in your district, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, this was really cool because what happened is that students would put up, in a classroom, typically, you have shrines to answers. Like there's this is my best work, or this is my finished product, or this is the project that I completed. But rarely do you see this process alive where students are at will putting up things that matter to them so everybody can see, and then putting up questions that they want to explore, and then putting up the connections that they're making. So this was an expression of in a classroom where students could see that all of this was being honored, and that was really exciting to see.
Okay, moving on. So how are we going to connect with our students? And we have a design on the left here of this slide that we use for our SEL sessions that Delane and I co-lead. And it's actually made up of 3 components, and you can probably pick those out from the graphic if you haven't already. And we thought we'd speak to each of these and ask if they connect in some way to your perspective as well. Um, I think the first one that sort of jumps out is heart. The shape that you can see, the predominant shape is the heart. And we talk about sort of how we can reach out to our students and connect with the things that they love, as Glenn was just sharing. And Glenn, you actually refer to that as response to inspiration, which I think is rather inspiring in itself. And we also see the brain shape there. The doodle in the middle is actually representative of the brain or the mind. And Delane, I wanted to have you share something you do every day to check in with where their brain's at. Where's their heart at? Can you share just a brief story about what you do to connect in with the students? And then we'll talk about individually.
Of course. I have been taking attendance by a Google form since I started teaching at Clovis Unified. And so my Google form is one question, which is, what should Mrs. Johnson know today? And the responses I get are incredible. So I learn when they got their driver's license. I learn when they are nervous about their college applications and their interviews. I learn when they're struggling. And lately, I've learned when they are on the edge of self-harm and how I can connect those students with our school psychologists. And if it wasn't for this daily check-in form, I don't know that students would be having those conversations with me. There's so much safety in them being able to fill out a blank space and tell me. So I get highs, I get lows, I get joy, I get tears. And it's just been incredible for me to make those connections with students when I cannot see them face to face.
And in
This is
the
so
era of
important that
COVID,
you,
it
I'm
has.
sorry, Mike, I just
Oh,
wanted
go
to
ahead,
point
Glenn.
out that she does that, Delane does that. See, she's a loving educator, I'm just saying. But the point is that she does that for her students. Uh, we also do that for our teachers too. We have a weekly check-in, not a daily, because we don't have time for them. But once a week, we do check-in.
That's a great point, and that really addresses the plus down at the bottom there, self care. I've got a little, capital SEL, lowercase f for self care, and you've spoken perfectly to that with your weekly check in. The in the era of COVID, last point I was going to make about Delane's daily check in is it actually also performs a functional purpose of attendance, right? You didn't build it for that in mind. You did this when you were seeing the kids face to face, but it has the bonus of also serving as an attendance check-in too, functionally. And the individuality, which is represented by the fingerprints. If you haven't called it out yet, that's the third piece of this image that's on the left side. The heart shape is actually made up of 2 fingerprints representing individuality and individual student needs. And I use that in my class, and when I was teaching, and when I do workshops and other activities, I use an activity to engage the participants to demonstrate their own individuality. And it's this concept of yes and. It actually comes from the world of improv. And the idea is to always be additive. So you support and encourage, but you also add something to a conversation or a brainstorming activity. And therein comes the individuality. I know that the time is short, so I want to move us along. So what's next? So we started with the why, and we went through the how. Now we're at the what. And instead of what, we thought as a group, we call this what next. And so I wanted to see if Glenn and Delane could share their thoughts on sort of where do we go? How do we make sure that we act on this and support our students as a whole children? Delane, did you have a quick thought on this?
Well, it is all about that curiosity and letting students know that sometimes it's not about the content, it's about who we are as people. And so I know that first word on the screen, I think people want to hear about power ectomy. So not, I'm not going to talk about that, but it is, and having that choice and making those connections. And how can we encourage students to find that vulnerable space, and it's okay to not be okay. So Glenn, you've got to talk about a powerectomy.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I was talking about before, if those three things, those three basic things, I mean, asking students what matters to them, asking teachers what matters to them, asking what questions, what curiosity, what do we not yet know? And then how are we making connections, creative, dynamic, divergent connections? Then if that's not in play, then we basically we performed a complete powerectomy on our students. And I didn't want one. It's like you went to the hospital to get an antibiotic and they took your tonsils out. I didn't want that. So no, thank you. Is that what, and what's really crazy about it is that, you know, uh, we want to keep the natural desire for learning that they came to us with alive. Shutting that down has been traumatic. In fact, with a nation that currently can't seemingly ask questions because they're all focused on answers, I think we've all seen what we've reaped from doing that. We need a country and a democracy that still can ask their own questions, think for themselves, that kind of thing. The other thing I think is what's next is we got to do the hard work of something easy. We've got to do the hard work of something easy. And that is keep reminding ourselves and reminding our colleagues and reminding our students of the few things that matter, not the 100 standards that are required by the state. I just think, part of that reminder can come from, statements like this, like standards were supposed to be the servant of learning, but all too often learning is the servant of the standards. So by taking a look at things like that, that can help get people in the right mindset that it's okay to put your students first.
I'm getting a couple of amens and here's one from Jason, which is fantastic. So I think we're on the same page as our audience. We're going to talk a little
Jason
bit about
agrees.
what's that?
Jason agrees with this stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh man, I had no idea he was such a loving human being. I did not know that. That's
He was a
fantastic,
sharp
Jason.
guy. Now we know
Well,
he
I
does.
know I knew. Now that I knew.
So, talking about autonomy, I wanted to point you all to the resources and point out one in particular. So when we do this as a longer session, an hour and a half or so, or sometimes even we jam it into an hour, here's the list of resources that we are able to walk through individually. And we didn't want to leave those out, even in this abbreviated session. So there are direct links on the webpage. This slide itself actually has live links as well. And there's a great example of a teacher that as the students are entering the class, she actually lets them decide how they're going to be greeted. And that's going to be either through a fist bump or a high five or even a dance. They even actually dance. And I can't find that link on this page. I could have sworn it was one of these links and I don't see it right now. So maybe we need to go and add it in. But no, that's a different one. In any case, these are all resources for you. They're all available at heartmind.us, and you could take a look at them there. And then I want to leave time as well because we're not done. This work is just beginning. And we said at the beginning of the session, our three we believe statements. The last one was that we won't finish this work. And so we've left enough time, I believe, for questions. And I'm going to jump over to the slide views to see what we got in terms of Q&A. You can use the chat, of course, or you can use the slide view for your Q&A. Either one works. We got Susan's eyes also on the Q&A, which is fabulous. And then here's the web page I was just describing. This takes you to our slides right here. You can follow us on Twitter at those addresses. And then those resources I was just describing for you are here as well. all of those work quite nicely. So I'm going to check over with Susan and Delane and Glenn and see if there's other pieces we can jump into while we're waiting for some of those questions to roll in.
Well, one of the things we might want to do is demonstrate this idea that maybe the Q&A, the Q is more important than the A. In other words, we've been at this for a while. I know the people in this room have totally are committed to this by evidence of what they said at the beginning. So maybe it might be more intriguing for us to out what questions we still have. Like, for example, I have a question myself. One of my questions would be, how do we take this value that we all hold so dearly, so passionately, and start addressing systems that exist within school districts that don't have a heart or a soul? The systems themselves don't have hearts and souls. So how do we advance this in what seemingly is rigid systems? That would be a question I have. Delane, question?
Yeah, one question that I have been asking myself a lot lately is I feel like I am, quote, just a teacher. And so I can't influence how those systems treat our children, treat our students. And so, what can I do as a teacher, as a tech TOSA, to kind of work through those systems to make sure that we have teachers that represent our students and that students feel like they have voice and what they're learning, what they're reading. So I can affect my classroom, but how do
Right.
I go broader?
Right.
And so if you have an idea, we would love to see that in ideas, or if you have
Now, before we get, I want to try to stop you there for a second, because we go right from the question and attempt to go right to the answer. I almost would prefer us to just continue with this idea of what I don't know. It's uncomfortable, but I think, but it's also comforting, because it's nice to be in a room of other people who don't know things. I'm often around people who I don't feel like I know things. I'm just saying. So,
I have a question.
there it is. There you go.
Okay. So I spend a lot of time working with parents and teachers and administrators, and they keep talking about how kids aren't learning anything, and there's this learning decline, and they're worried about the gap, blah, blah, blah. And my feeling is that's a mistake. I think kids are learning a whole lot right now. It just doesn't happen to be in a textbook. And so what I'm wondering is, how do we help educators and parents and even the students themselves shift their thinking so that they recognize that that they're learning things that are really important, and be able to identify what are those things that kids are learning that they will never forget?
That's beautiful. Now, see what I mean? More questions. I'm very excited by this.
And as
I'm
moderator,
very
I
excited.
would say if any participants want to just unmute and jump in, would
Yeah,
that be okay with you guys?
please.
Okay.
Yeah, your
Again,
question.
I'm calling for questions.
Your question, Susan, reminds me of when we were talking about game-based learning years ago, and the question was, what can they learn from video games, or how do we make sure that that the games are educational? Because the premise is they are learning. They are always learning. They're learning machines. That's what kids are. That's what humans are. It's just the question is it what we want them to be learning, right? So
Yeah,
I think your
exactly.
point is well taken, that they're absolutely learning in the middle of this pandemic. What are they learning? And can we help shape those lessons so that they're positive lessons and lessons that will help them in their life? I think the biggest one, at least it is in my house, is they're learning how they learn. My daughter is now having to take more ownership of her own learning, and she's a 7th grader, and it's teaching her what she needs to learn. Is she an auditory learner? Is she someone that needs to be able to touch things to really get in deep to learn? And that's one of the lessons that she's taking away from the extended remote learning.
Yeah, it's been interesting. My granddaughter is in 8th grade, and she has been talking with me a lot lately about relationships. She's thinking way more about the relationships with her teachers than she ever did before, and says, I've got 3 who really care about me out of 7.
Mm.
Any questions from the group? Feel free to, as Susan mentioned, unmute and
Now, based on our own rubric, Mike, that questions that are generated show the hunger. So evidently the food we served was not that appetizing, evidently.
maybe they're still noodling on them.
Is that, you would think that, oh, that could be. I like that idea. I like
You
that
did
better.
there? Noodle?
Yeah, I like that. Well, I was getting depressed. Yeah, I feel better now.
Well, is there a way, it's hard to come up with this kind of question, I
Yeah.
think. And maybe participants are still noodling on this stuff themselves and might want to come up with a question that they could send to you later. Would there be a
That's
way
a
for
great
them to get in
idea.
touch?
That's a great idea. And I think also part of the deal is Stanford. You've heard of this college, Stanford? Have you heard of it? It's a nice little community college up north. They had to start a project called the Resilience Project a few years ago. One of the first things they did is for their undergraduates that were just coming in, they had to exhort them to start asking questions because these wonderful students that are obviously the top of the tier of freshmen coming into colleges equated asking questions with stupidity and embarrassment. And my question is, how do we stop that? How do we change that? Where the question itself becomes more important in a sense than the answer. So there's a lot of trauma around that. The other question I would have is, how are we going to get people after all those years of No Child Left Behind, and then we throw in Common Core on top of that deal? After all that time, how are we going to heal teachers from the post-traumatic standards disorder that they are currently experiencing?
Well, on that cheerful note, it's 10:30, and wow, this session was great. I'm glad I get to stick around to hear part of it at least again. Thanks to everybody for coming, and thanks to 3 remarkable presenters. Right now, there's contact information on the slide if you want to get in touch with the speakers, if you come up with those questions that you'd like to ask.
Here we are in our celebrity incarnations.
Wow, and so apropos. Very good, very good. Thank you all very much for a wonderful session. I hope the participants have a great remainder of their mornings, and thank you all so much for being here.